Who lost this military canine? It was only 6 words, quietly spoken beneath the steady hum of fluorescent lights. Yet every Navy SEAL in the emergency room rose to their feet before the nurse could repeat them. The emergency department at St. Michael's Medical Center in Virginia Beach had seen every kind of crisis imaginable. Storm rescues, highway collisions, fishing accidents, military training injuries. Nothing surprised the overnight staff anymore. Until that rainy Thursday just after 2 a.m. outside. A cold Atlantic drizzle painted the parking lot in silver reflections while ambulance lights flashed silently across puddles. Inside, the scent of antiseptic mixed with fresh coffee and damp jackets as exhausted doctors moved between treatment rooms with practiced calm. Then the automatic doors slid open. A state trooper hurried inside, carrying a large German shepherd wrapped carefully in a faded military blanket. The dog's sable coat was soaked from the rain, his breathing slow but steady, his amber eyes half open despite obvious exhaustion. Mud clung to his paws. A worn tactical collar circled his neck, though no identification tag remained attached. Only the outline where one had once rested against the leather. The trooper spoke softly. Found him sitting in the middle of Highway 58. Wouldn't move. Cars kept stopping because somehow, nobody wanted to drive around him. Nurses rushed forward without hesitation. Someone brought a stretcher, but the dog refused to leave the blanket until gentle hands reassured him. Even then, he never growled. Never barked. He simply looked around the room as though searching for someone who had promised to return. Emily Carter, the senior ER nurse on duty, knelt beside him and carefully checked the collar. Her fingers paused against faded stitching. Military issue. Old. Worn from years of service. She looked toward the waiting area where nearly a dozen Navy SEALs, still wearing training uniforms after finishing overnight water exercises at Little Creek, were quietly filling out paperwork for one of their teammates recovering from dehydration. Emily held up the collar and asked with genuine curiosity, "Who lost this?" "Military canine." Every chair scraped across the floor at once. Conversation stopped. Coffee cups froze halfway to waiting hands. One by one, every SEAL stood without exchanging a single word. Some stared at the dog. Others stared at the collar. One man's breathing caught so suddenly it sounded louder than the heart monitor beside him. No one smiled. No one spoke. Respect settled over the room like a silent flag lowered at sunset. The German shepherd slowly lifted his head. His tired ears twitched toward the familiar sound of combat boots shifting across polished tile. Then his eyes settled on the men standing together beneath the pale hospital lights. For the first time since entering the building, his tail moved once against the blanket. Just once. Small, weak, hopeful. And in that single quiet motion, every man in the room understood they were not looking at a stray dog. They were looking at someone who had once worn the same uniform in a different way, someone who had disappeared years ago without a goodbye, someone every one of them believed had been lost forever. Nathan Brooks had never planned to become a Navy SEAL. As a boy growing up along the quiet shoreline of Annapolis, Maryland, he believed the strongest people were the ones who stayed calm when everyone else panicked. His father had served in the Navy for 27 years, and his mother taught elementary school just a few miles from the harbor. Discipline filled their home, but kindness filled it first. Nathan carried both lessons into adulthood. By the age of 34, he had completed deployments that few people would ever hear about, earning the quiet respect reserved for those who accomplished impossible things without asking for recognition. Yet if anyone on his team had been asked who Nathan trusted most, none of them would have named another operator. They would have pointed toward the German shepherd lying patiently beside him. Valor entered Nathan's life as an 18-month-old military working dog selected from a specialized training program outside San Antonio, Texas. The instructors described him as unusually observant. He rarely barked without reason. He watched everything. He remembered everyone. During evaluations, while other dogs reacted to commands, Valor seemed to anticipate them before they were spoken. The first time Nathan met him, the dog walked across the training field without hesitation and rested his head against Nathan's leg as though greeting someone he had known for years. One instructor smiled quietly. "Sometimes they choose their partner before we do." From that morning forward, the two became inseparable. They trained before sunrise beneath cool coastal skies, running miles across soft sand while waves rolled onto Virginia Beach in steady rhythm. Nathan never treated Valor like equipment. He spoke to him the way one teammate spoke to another. Every successful exercise ended the same way. A scratch behind the ears. A simple smile. A quiet, "Good work, brother." Valor responded not with excitement, but with calm confidence, his amber eyes fixed on Nathan as if every word mattered. The other operators noticed the connection immediately. During long training days, Valor somehow knew exactly which teammate needed encouragement. He would gently rest beside the newest recruit struggling through exhaustion or quietly nudge an anxious medic before difficult exercises. Even the toughest instructors eventually stopped pretending the dog was only there for assignments. He became part of the family. Friday evenings often ended with the team gathered around picnic tables overlooking the water while hamburgers cooked on old charcoal grills and laughter drifted through the salty breeze. Valor wandered from one group to another collecting gentle pats from familiar hands before returning to lie beside Nathan's boots as the sun disappeared beyond the Chesapeake Bay. Someone once joked that the dog knew classified information simply because he attended every conversation. Nathan laughed and replied, "He knows something more important. He knows who comes home." Nobody realized how deeply those words would echo years later. On the wall inside the command building hung photographs of every deployment team. In each picture, the same pair appeared side by side. Nathan standing tall with quiet eyes. Valor sitting proudly beside him, ears forward, watching the camera with unwavering focus. To everyone who served with them, they represented more than experience. They represented trust built one ordinary day at a time until it became stronger than fear itself. Years passed before anyone in that hospital understood what had separated Nathan Brooks and Valor. It happened during an early autumn operation along a rugged stretch of coastline where thick morning fog drifted across abandoned warehouses and empty shipping docks. The mission itself was meant to be quiet, precise, and over before sunrise. Nathan's team moved carefully through narrow service roads while distant harbor lights shimmered across dark water. The cool air carried the scent of salt, diesel fuel, and wet timber, familiar smells that usually meant routine work for experienced operators. Valor stayed close at Nathan's left side, his ears constantly turning toward sounds too distant for human hearing. Every few moments he glanced back at Nathan, waiting for the smallest signal before taking another step. That silent conversation between man and dog had become second nature after years together. Near the edge of an old storage yard, Valor suddenly stopped walking. His posture changed instantly. His tail lowered. His muscles tightened. Instead of continuing forward, he gently stepped across Nathan's path and looked directly into his eyes. Nathan recognized the warning immediately. Valor had sensed something unusual. He quietly signaled the rest of the team to slow down while everyone paused behind rows of weathered cargo containers. For several long seconds, nothing moved except the mist rolling across cracked pavement. Then, from somewhere beyond the fog, a frightened child's voice called for help. The sound was faint, uncertain, almost carried away by the wind. Every member of the team looked toward Nathan. Training demanded patience, but compassion demanded action. Nathan trusted both. He nodded once, and Valor moved ahead with remarkable care, following the sound while never pulling too far away from his partner. Hidden behind a collapsed fence, they discovered a young boy no older than 8 years old, frightened after becoming separated from his father during an overnight fishing trip. The child was cold, exhausted, and too afraid to leave his hiding place. Nathan slowly knelt several feet away, speaking with the calm voice that had comforted frightened civilians many times before. Before the boy responded, Valor quietly approached on his own. He lowered his body close to the ground, wagged his tail only once, and rested a gentle paw near the child's shoe. Within moments, the boy wrapped both arms around the German shepherd's neck, tears giving way to relief. The entire team relaxed with grateful smiles. Nathan contacted local authorities to reunite the family, while several operators secured the surrounding area. It should have been the end of an ordinary rescue. But as emergency vehicles approached from the nearby highway, confusion spread through the thick fog. Multiple agencies arrived from different directions, and visibility dropped until even familiar faces became little more than moving shadows. Nathan helped guide the rescued child toward waiting first responders while Valor circled back exactly as he had been trained, searching for his partner through the growing crowd. Then the fog swallowed everything. Voices echoed. Engine started. Flashing lights reflected against drifting mist. By the time the morning sun finally broke through, Nathan was standing beside his teammates with an empty leash in his hand. Search teams spent the next several days combing forests, marshland, highways, and nearby neighborhoods. Volunteers joined the effort. Flyers covered storefront windows. Local families checked security cameras and walking trails. Weeks became months. Months became years. No trace of Valor was ever found. Eventually, the military closed the case with heavy hearts, honoring him as a partner who had disappeared in faithful service. Nathan accepted the folded report with steady hands, but every evening before leaving the base, he still turned toward the empty training field, listening for familiar footsteps that never came. 4 years passed, but the hospital records would later show that the German Shepherd had arrived with no owner, no identification, and no history anyone could verify. What those records could never explain was where he had been during those missing years. Along the quiet back roads of southeastern Virginia, people occasionally spoke about a large sable dog that seemed to appear whenever someone needed help. An elderly couple claimed he guided them back to their truck after they wandered too far through a state park at sunset. A school bus driver remembered seeing the same dog standing beside a flooded country road until every child had crossed safely on a higher ground. A fisherman from Chesapeake insisted the shepherd barked until he noticed smoke rising from the engine of his old pickup before it became something far worse. No one knew his name. No one ever managed to keep him. Whenever someone offered food or a warm place to stay, the dog accepted with quiet gratitude, rested for a short while, and disappeared before dawn. It was almost as though he believed someone, somewhere, was still waiting for him to finish an assignment that had never truly ended. The years left gentle marks upon him. A touch of gray appeared around his muzzle. Small scars faded beneath his thick coat. His once pristine tactical collar weathered beneath rain, snow, and endless miles of walking until the leather softened with age. Yet despite everything, the discipline never left him. He still sat before crossing busy intersections. He still avoided startling strangers. He still watched every doorway before entering a building. The habits of service had become part of who he was. During winter storms, residents occasionally found mysterious paw prints circling isolated farmhouses after heavy snowfall, as though someone had quietly checked every home before moving on. In spring, hikers reported seeing the shepherd resting near wooded trails where children often wandered, lifting his head whenever families approached before disappearing among the tall pines without making a sound. Local animal shelters received dozens of phone calls over the years describing the same remarkable dog, but every rescue team arrived just a little too late. It became a story shared across coffee shops and volunteer fire stations. Some called him the guardian dog. Others simply referred to him as the soldier without a home. Meanwhile, Nathan Brooks continued serving, though something inside him never completely healed. He accepted new responsibilities, trained younger operators, and carried out every duty with the same professionalism that had always defined him. Still, every morning before sunrise, he walked the edge of the training field alone with an empty leash folded neatly inside his jacket pocket. He never spoke about it. He did not have to. His teammates understood. They noticed how his eyes instinctively searched every German shepherd they passed in airports, parks, and military ceremonies. Hope became quieter with each passing year, but it never disappeared. Then, on that rainy Thursday night, hundreds of miles of unseen footsteps finally reached their destination. As doctors finished cleaning the mud from the exhausted shepherd's paws, Emily Carter carefully brushed away layers of dirt trapped beneath the old tactical collar. Her fingertips paused against something hidden inside the worn leather lining. It felt too smooth to be stitching and too deliberate to be accidental. She gently turned the collar beneath the examination light. Sewn into the inside, almost completely concealed by years of wear, were several tiny embroidered letters that had somehow survived rain, time, and countless lonely miles. Emily leaned closer, narrowing her eyes as she slowly read the faded thread aloud, her voice barely louder than a whisper. The faded letters stitched beneath the collar read only 2 words: Valor. B12. Emily Carter looked up slowly, uncertain why the simple embroidery had changed the expressions on every face around her. One of the older Navy SEALs stepped forward before anyone else could speak. His name was Chief Petty Officer Daniel Hayes, and the color had quietly drained from his face. He did not touch the dog. Instead, he removed his cap and held it against his chest. "That cannot be possible," he whispered, almost to himself. Another operator leaned closer, his eyes fixed on the collar. B12 was his operational designation. The room grew completely silent. Even the steady rhythm of heart. Monitors seemed distant. Emily looked from one man to another. "You know this dog?" Daniel swallowed carefully before answering. "Not just this dog." His voice cracked with restrained emotion. "He was one of us." The German shepherd slowly opened his tired eyes. For several long seconds, he simply studied the faces surrounding him. His gaze moved from one operator to the next as though searching through years of forgotten mornings and familiar voices. Then his eyes stopped on Daniel. The old chief crouched carefully several feet away. "Easy there, partner," he said softly. "It is Daniel." The dog did not stand. He did not bark, but his ears lifted ever so slightly. Daniel smiled through moist eyes. "You always tilted your left ear first whenever you recognized someone." Several younger operators exchanged confused glances. They had heard stories about Nathan Brooks and his legendary military working dog during training, but those stories belonged to another generation. None of them had believed they would ever meet the dog whose disappearance had become part of their command's history. Emily reached into the medical chart. "Should I contact animal control?" Every operator answered at once. "No." Their voices overlapped with surprising urgency before settling again into respectful quiet. Daniel shook his head gently. "Call Commander Ellis at Naval Special Warfare Command. Tell him Valor has come home." Emily blinked in disbelief. "Home?" Daniel nodded. "Someone has been waiting 4 years for that phone call." Across town, Nathan Brooks sat alone inside a modest waterfront house overlooking the Elizabeth River. Retirement paperwork covered the kitchen table beside a mug of coffee that had long since gone cold. Dawn was still an hour away. Rain tapped softly against the windows while an old leather leash rested beside framed photographs from another life. Nathan reached for the leash out of habit, running his thumb across its worn handle exactly as he had done almost every morning since Valor disappeared. The silence inside the house had become familiar. Then his phone rang. The display showed an unfamiliar hospital number. Nathan almost ignored it. He answered only because years of service had taught him never to dismiss unexpected calls before sunrise. Nathan Brooks speaking. Emily hesitated for only a heartbeat. "Sir, I know this is going to sound impossible." Nathan closed his eyes. Something deep inside him stirred before she finished the sentence. "There is a German shepherd here wearing an old military working dog collar. His name is stitched inside." Nathan stopped breathing. Emily continued quietly. "The collar says Valor." Nothing came from the other end of the line. Only silence. Then, after several seconds that felt like years, Nathan whispered the same words he had spoken every night before leaving the empty training field. "Good boy. I knew you were still trying to find your way home." Nathan Brooks could not remember the drive to the hospital. Later, he would recall only fragments. Rain sliding across the windshield. Red traffic lights reflected on wet pavement. The familiar weight of the old leather leash resting on the passenger seat beside him. Every mile felt suspended somewhere between memory and hope. He had imagined this moment 1,000 different ways over 4 long years, but never once had he believed it would truly arrive. When he reached St. Michael's Medical Center, dawn was only beginning to soften the eastern sky. Pale blue lights spilled across the parking lot, while the rain slowly faded into a fine mist. Daniel Hayes was already waiting near the entrance. Neither man spoke. Daniel simply placed a steady hand on Nathan's shoulder and nodded toward the examination room. That small gesture carried everything words could not. Inside, the room remained quiet. Emily Carter adjusted an intravenous line before stepping away without being asked. The physicians understood this meeting belonged to someone else now. Valor rested peacefully beneath a warm blanket, his breathing stronger than it had been only hours earlier. His muzzle had turned noticeably gray, and faint scars traced stories that no official report would ever record. Nathan stopped several feet from the bed. He did not rush forward. He did not call the dog's name. Years of working together had taught him that trust never demanded urgency. Instead, he simply stood there with relaxed shoulders and whispered the same greeting he had used before every training exercise. "Morning, partner." For several seconds, nothing happened. Valor remained still, his eyes closed as though lost inside a distant dream. Then one ear twitched. Slowly, almost cautiously, the German shepherd opened his amber eyes. They wandered across the room before settling on the familiar figure standing quietly beneath the morning light. Nathan smiled, though tears blurred his vision. "It is all right," he whispered. "Take your time." Valor lifted his head only an inch from the blanket. His breathing quickened. His nose caught the scent carried across the room by years of shared mornings. Ocean air, leather gloves, coffee before sunrise, and countless silent walks across training fields. Some memories belong to the mind. Others belong to the heart. This one belonged to both. The old dog struggled gently to stand. Emily instinctively stepped forward to help, but Nathan quietly raised one hand. "He knows what he is doing." Valor placed one paw onto the floor, then another. His legs trembled beneath him, weakened by exhaustion rather than fear. Step by careful step, he crossed the small distance separating 4 years of silence from the only person he had never stopped searching for. Nathan lowered himself onto one knee. No commands, no whistles, no expectation, only open arms. Valor reached him at last and rested his head against Nathan's chest exactly as he had done the first day they met outside the training facility in Texas. The room remained completely still. Several nurses quietly wiped away tears. Daniel removed his cap once more. Even the physicians found themselves smiling without realizing it. Nathan wrapped one arm gently around the shepherd's neck and closed his eyes. "You kept your promise," he whispered into the soft gray fur. "You found your way back." Valor answered in the only language he had ever needed. His tired tail tapped softly against the polished floor. Once, then again. Slow, steady, certain. It was not the excited greeting of a dog seeing his owner after a long day. It was the peaceful sigh of an old soldier finally returning to the teammate who had never stopped waiting. The reunion spread through the hospital long before the morning shift officially began. Nurses who had finished their rounds quietly stepped into the hallway, not because they had been called there, but because stories like this seemed to pull people together without anyone asking. Outside the examination room, Commander Richard Ellis from Naval Special Warfare Command arrived just after sunrise. His neatly pressed uniform contrasted with the sleepless expressions around him. Yet the moment he saw Nathan sitting beside Valor, the years seemed to fall away. He had been the commanding officer who signed the final report declaring the military working dog lost in service. It had remained one of the few documents he never managed to forget. Richard entered slowly, stopping a respectful distance away. Valor lifted his head and studied him for several seconds before giving the slightest wag of recognition. The commander smiled softly. "You still remember inspections, do you?" he whispered. Nathan looked up with tired eyes. "He remembers everyone who treated him like family." Richard nodded, but said nothing more. Instead, he gently placed an old wooden presentation box on the bedside table. Inside rested Valor's original military identification tag, carefully preserved after the search had ended 4 years earlier. Regulations had required the tag to be archived after he was declared missing, but Richard had never been able to throw it away. "I always hoped I would need this again," he admitted quietly. Nathan picked up the weathered tag, its edges polished smooth by years of handling. Without hesitation, he clipped it back onto Valor's collar. The soft metallic click echoed through the silent room. Valor lowered his nose toward the tag, inhaled once, and closed his eyes as though recognizing a forgotten piece of himself. At that exact moment, a maintenance employee passing through the hallway stopped outside the open door. His name was Harold Simmons, a quiet man who had worked at the hospital for nearly 20 years. He stared at the German shepherd with growing disbelief before slowly removing his glasses. "That cannot be," he murmured. Emily turned toward him. "Do you know him too?" Harold stepped inside carefully, almost afraid of interrupting something sacred. "About 3 winters ago, during one of the worst snowstorms we ever had, my wife slipped outside our farmhouse and could not get back up because of the ice." His voice trembled gently. A German shepherd appeared out of nowhere. He stayed beside her for nearly an hour until I followed his barking through the snow. Harold looked directly at Valor. I never found him afterward. He disappeared before I could even thank him. Before anyone could respond, another nurse quietly spoke from the doorway. Last summer, my nephew got separated during a family picnic at First Landing State Park. Rangers said a large German shepherd stayed with him until they arrived. Soon another story followed. Then another. A firefighter remembered the mysterious dog leading an elderly man away from rising floodwater. A delivery driver recalled finding a lost little girl calmly holding the shepherd's collar while waiting beside a country church. None of them had known his name. None of them had realized the quiet guardian wandering through their communities had once served beside America's finest operators. Nathan listened without interrupting. Every story painted another small piece of the life Valor had lived after they were separated. He had not spent those years searching only for his partner. He had continued serving in the only way he knew how, one quiet act of kindness at a time. Nathan rested his hand gently on Valor's shoulder and smiled through grateful tears. "You never stopped being a good boy," he whispered. "You simply found new people to protect until you could find your way back to me." 3 weeks later, beneath a clear Virginia sky washed clean by an early autumn breeze, the parade field at Naval Special Warfare Command looked different than it had on any ordinary morning. The scent of freshly cut grass drifted through the air while rows of American flags moved gently against a cloudless horizon. Hundreds of service members gathered in quiet formation, not for a graduation, not for a promotion, and not for a farewell. They had assembled to welcome home a teammate whose name had never been removed from their memories. Nathan Brooks walked slowly across the field with Valor beside him. The old German shepherd no longer moved with the effortless confidence of his younger years. His steps were measured, his muzzle silver with age, yet every stride carried the quiet dignity of someone who had fulfilled every promise ever asked of him. The restored identification tag rested softly against his weathered collar, catching the morning sunlight with each step. Families lined the edges of the ceremony. Children who had heard the remarkable story watched in complete silence, while veterans stood with hands folded before them, understanding without explanation that they were witnessing something far greater than an official recognition. Commander Richard Ellis stepped to the podium but allowed the silence to settle before speaking. "Today," he began, his steady voice carrying across the field, "we honor a military working dog who never stopped serving, even after the world believed his mission had ended. Valor spent 4 years protecting strangers, comforting frightened children, guiding those in danger, and asking for nothing in return. That is the definition of service. That is the definition of honor." No applause interrupted his words. Instead, every Navy SEAL on the field came to attention. One by one, they raised their right hands in salute. The gesture spread across the formation until every uniformed man and woman stood perfectly still beneath the morning sky. Nathan looked down at Valor. The old shepherd seemed almost puzzled by the attention. His ears shifted slightly as though searching for the next instruction, the next assignment, the next quiet duty waiting somewhere beyond the ceremony. Nathan smiled gently. "Stand easy, partner," he whispered. "You already finished the mission." Commander Ellis stepped away from the podium carrying a small blue velvet case. Inside rested a simple medal engraved with the words "Faithful Service." It was not intended to celebrate remarkable moments. It honored unwavering character. Rather, than placing it around Valor's neck, the commander attached it carefully beside the restored identification tag on the old tactical collar. The tiny medal rested there without fanfare, almost disappearing beneath the thick sable fur. Somehow that made it feel even more meaningful. A military band began playing softly in the distance, but the music remained gentle enough to let the quiet speak for itself. Nathan knelt beside Valor and scratched the familiar spot behind his ears. The German shepherd leaned against him exactly as he had done years earlier during training, his eyes half closed, perfectly content. Along the front row, Harold Simmons, Emily Carter, Daniel Hayes, and several of the ordinary people whose lives had quietly crossed Valor's path stood together. None of them had expected to become part of military history. Yet every one of them understood that true greatness often passes unnoticed until someone finally tells the whole story. As the ceremony ended, there were no dramatic speeches, no loud celebrations, and no grand display. Only a long line of sailors, operators, nurses, firefighters, neighbors, and grateful strangers waiting patiently for a chance to gently shake Nathan's hand and softly stroke the head of the old German shepherd who had spent a lifetime reminding everyone that the strongest hearts are often the quietest. The months that followed settled into a rhythm neither Nathan Brooks nor Valor ever tried to change. Every morning before sunrise, they walked together along the quiet shoreline where the Elizabeth River met the Chesapeake Bay. The world seemed slower there. Fishing boats drifted lazily across calm water. Gulls circled above the docks. The scent of salt, cedar, and fresh coffee floated from small waterfront cafes opening for the day. Nathan no longer carried the empty leash folded inside his jacket. Now it rested comfortably in his hand once again, though most of the time it hung loose because Valor never wandered far. He had spent too many years searching to ever lose sight of home again. Neighbors quickly grew accustomed to seeing the old German shepherd greeting children on their way to school. He walked patiently beside elderly residents crossing quiet intersections and waited outside the local library every Thursday afternoon for Harold Simmons to finish volunteering. Emily Carter often visited after long hospital shifts, bringing homemade dog treats that Valor politely accepted before resting his head against her knee in silent appreciation. None of them tried to make him a hero. They simply loved him for the gentle soul he had always been. Nathan eventually placed the restored military identification tag and the small medal beside Valor's bed each evening rather than leaving them on his collar overnight. Even old soldiers deserve to sleep comfortably, he would say with a smile before scratching behind the shepherd's ears. Valor always watched him with the same calm amber eyes that had first chosen him years ago on a quiet training field in Texas. One crisp October afternoon, Nathan drove back to the old base where their journey had begun. The training grounds looked much the same as they always had. New recruits ran across the sand. Instructors called commands through the cool ocean air. Somewhere a whistle echoed across the obstacle course. Nathan sat on a weathered wooden bench while Valor lay quietly at his feet, watching the next generation prepare for lives of service. A young handler approached with an energetic German shepherd just beginning advanced training. "Sir," the young man asked respectfully, "how do you know when a dog truly trusts you?" Nathan looked down at Valor before answering. "You do not earn it during the hard days. You earn it during the ordinary ones. Show up every morning. Keep your promises. Be patient when they are afraid. Be grateful when they are brave. One day you will realize the leash was never what kept you together." The young handler nodded thoughtfully before walking away. Nathan smiled as Valor gently rested his head against his boot. Neither of them needed another mission. Neither needed another ceremony. They had already discovered something far more valuable than recognition. As winter approached, the evenings grew colder, and a fire often crackled softly inside Nathan's small waterfront home. Valor always chose the same place beside the old armchair, close enough to hear Nathan turning the pages of a book, close enough to know he was no longer alone. Outside, waves continued washing against the shoreline exactly as they had for generations. Inside, peace finally settled where longing had once lived. Some stories end with victory. Others end with applause. But the ones people remember the longest usually end much more quietly, with a faithful heart finally finding its way home, a promise kept without expecting recognition, and two old friends sharing the kind of silence that only unwavering love can understand.